Welcome back to Truth Talk Live. I am Peter Rosenberger. Glad to have you with us. We're going to get to our phones here in just a bit, but I did ask someone to be on the program today. By the way, if you do want to call in, 866-348-7884, 866-34-TRUTH. I asked Jeff Keene to call in today. I've been talking about my wife's journey with amputation. We do a prosthetic limb ministry over in West Africa where we have trained and equipped workers there to build prosthetic limbs for their own people. It's called Standing with Hope. You can go out to standingwithhope.com and see more about it. But Jeff was a firefighter who had his own encounter with trauma and suffering and amputation, and I wanted him to tell his story. So Jeff, welcome to the program. You are the author of When the Other Boot Drops, which I think is a great title for a book with somebody missing a leg. Here. It's great. Now listen, you know you've been an amputee for a long time, and I want you to tell your story.
Correct.
But you and I both know that part of just dealing with this is having a pretty good sense of humor. And
absolutely,
if you don't, you're not going to make it because it's just too tough. But when you have a title called "When the Other Boot Drops," that's pretty funny. So I like you had me at your title, Jeff. So welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit what happened. Tell us your story.
Well, yeah, you know that when the other boot drops, that comes from the saying when the other shoe drops. And that's, to define that, it means seemingly inevitable event, especially one not desirable. And of course, having a multi-ton water-filled, gear-filled fire truck stop on your foot at a fire call is definitely one of those seemingly inevitable events that's undesirable. And that's what happened. I was only in the fire department for about a year in New York, the Freeport Fire Department on Long Island, and I had just completed my training, 300 hours of fire service training, and I was raring to go to help the community, and one misstep later at the call, and the truck stopped on my foot, crushing it. So now, of course, the amputation didn't happen right away. They tried to save it for about 3 weeks.
You know,
but when they could not.
On that note, I had a guy that reached out to us. A friend of ours connected us to him. He had a trauma accident, and very much like so many others do, they try to save it. But it's inevitable, like you said. And how you said they tried to save it for about 3 weeks?
Yeah, it was. They sent me home even after about a week and a half for another week or so, 5 days, just to see how the body would heal itself, you know. And of course, the reverse was happening, and it was becoming essentially gangrenous. And so the day after my 19th birthday, 1989, September 1989, they removed it. Now, they did give me an option first. They said that they wanted to try to remove a muscle from my back to replace some of the missing tissue in the bottom of my foot. But I just didn't want them to touch any other part of my body. So that's I decided. That was a big decision at that age, but I had to decide for them to take my foot.
You know, Jeff, that is a big decision. And, Gracie made that decision twice in her life to go ahead and take it because it was her decision to give them up. But they spent years trying to save her legs, and most of the surgeries she had were as a result of trying to save it or repair the damage for trying to save it.
Wow.
And she would tell you straight up, and I think you would agree, there are worse things than amputation. And
absolutely, and worse parts of your body to get amputated.
That's true. And what did as you dealt with the aftermath of trauma, and you got on to write about this, and you've gone on to have a powerful voice for this. What are some things about trauma that you want people to know after reading your book and spending some time with you? What would you like for them to understand about life, faith, God's provision, all those things?
Well, my story is definitely, triumph over torture, solace over suffering, conquest over confusion. And these are all the things that when someone goes through a traumatic event, be it physical or emotional, they find themselves dealing with on a daily basis. You know, the torture, the suffering, the confusion, in so many different overlapping ways. And it's really, it's a grieving process. Being injured, permanently injured, for example, the loss of limb has been akin to that of losing a loved one. Now, of course, I'm not going to compare the loss of a digit or a foot to the loss of, a spouse or a parent or a child. That's probably far more. But it's
no, but I mean, you have to grieve it out. It's a permanent loss, and you have to grieve it out.
Correct.
We know that. Yeah, I agree with that.
But my story is that at the time I did not know Jesus. At the time I was not a saved person, and it took a lot of things in the healing process for me to look back on with hindsight and say, oh, now I see God's plan. Now I see what all of this, all the little pieces that fell into place to get me to where I am 34 years later, or 35 years later. So, we don't realize that when we're in the mix of the injury or the suffering or the healing, and we know the healing can take many, many years. There's no doubt about that. But honestly, more important than the physical healing was the spiritual healing, because once you let go of the blame, that's a very important piece of my book is the blame part. We want to blame ourselves. We want to blame someone else. We want to blame an object that was the cause, or someone's mismanagement or negligence. But that's hypocritical.
Well, sometimes people want to blame God.
Exactly, but I didn't know God, so I didn't blame God. You see, whereas if I had known God and my faith was possibly damaged, wavering, whatever at the time, maybe I would have blamed God. And of course, I feel blessed because now when I look back, I'm thankful that I didn't blame God. I never blamed God. Not that there's any, not that that's not part of the grieving process. I'm not saying that, but just letting go of blame on all levels, because blame is a hypocritical behavior. As far as us Christians go, you want to focus on a gentler, more positive outlook. What can you do that will focus you on something more rewarding, rather than looking back at the pain and the blame and the hate? So
what was the process like for you to come to that acceptance?
Well, one of the most important things was one of the hardest parts of my story to write wasn't even about me. It was about the man who was driving the fire truck, the man who actually ran over an 18-year-old boy, and altered the course of his life forever. This man was a veteran firefighter, a multi-talented person, and he was going to quit firefighting altogether. And so, even though I didn't know what I was, because of this, even though I didn't know what I was going to why I was doing this, I only look back now and say, God must have had his hand in this, because I forgave him. You hear about people forgiving a murderer for, killing somebody they loved, and you say, I could never do that. You overhear people saying, I could never do that. And I always tell people, particularly my high school students, that can only come from God. That kind of forgiveness can only come from God. And so that's where I believe that was the most important change for me, was being able to forgive somebody else, even though they thought it was their fault.
I talk about that a lot with forgiveness, because that's a big issue that so many caregivers and all face. Forgiveness doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It means that you're going to turn this over to the one who can deal with it best, and that is God. It is an act of faith. It's not saying it's okay, I forgive you, and just be kind of emotional and hallmarky about it. It means I am going to take an act of faith that in God's economy, in God's provision, in God's decrees, this will be handled by God, and I trust him with this.
Yes, and when you do that, you take off so much weight from your own healing process. And it becomes easier to move forward. Absolutely.
When people finish your book, and the book is called When the Other Boot Drops, and by the way, if you want to go out and see more about Jeff, you can go out to his website, Pegleg Penman. He's peglegpenman.com. Again, sometimes when you go through things like this, you end up developing a pretty weird sense of humor. I know. And peglegpenman.com. But when people finish this book, Jeff, in 10 seconds, what do you want them to know?
I just want them to know that they can triumph over their torture and solace over their suffering and gain conquest over their confusion through God. Yeah.
Great words. Jeff Keene, When the Other Boot Drops. This is Peter Rosenberger. We'll be right back.